Hello viewers, Alan here, back in the workshop. Today I'm getting starting on another project. This will be a very quick one really, fired up by my wife again. She sees a vacant spot in the back garden which in her mind is calling out for a bench seat. So I've got some bits and pieces left over from various things. Well, actually they're not left over, they're bits that were given to me by a neighbour, and it's most of a bench seat. So that's where we're going to start. You see perched rather precariously beside me here is a cast iron end for a garden bench. I've got a pair of those. So the idea is to use those and a slab of Philippines mahogany that's been hanging around waiting for a good use, and make a garden bench. So it should be pretty quick. Let's get to it. Okay, so look at this slab of Philippines mahogany that's going to be the seat. I'm not sure what I'm going to make the backrest out of yet, but that's the slab of wood that's destined for the seat. So I'm going to trim the ends up and basically use it at its full length, and then find, as I say, a piece for the backrest to go with it. So that's trimmed both ends. This is actually a fantastic saw. One of the things that it does, when you pull it in and out, you might notice the mechanism at the back there. It doesn't have anything sticking out back past the thing. It's got this special parallelogram arrangement that works really well, and it's very compact, so you don't have bits sticking out to fall over, and very neat. Anyway, it's an excellent job of that. So on to the next bit. So I've had the ends, the cast iron ends powder coated, or sandblasted and powder coated. And that wasn't cheap either. They seem to do it by weight, and these ends are 20 kilograms each, the ends. Anyway, hopefully with the powder coating it will be, well, I won't have to paint it again in my lifetime, that'd be nice. Anyway, and I've set the plank in there, just for idea of scale and so on, and I think it's going to be a good size for 3 people. And I think I'll have 60 millimeters of overhang out each side of the ends. So now it's time to drill some holes and get some bolts into the seat. Okay, so time to drill a couple of holes in the seat base using my non-mag drill, portable drill. Well, it's non-magnetic, isn't it? So it wouldn't work. Anyway, here we go. This is 45 thick, this slab. Oh, let's just finish it by hand. Right, so our first hole. Right, I'll turn the setup around and drill a hole on the other end. Okay, so it's time to see if I've managed to get 2 holes in a line. Well, I'm pleased to report that those 2 holes went in the right place, and the plank's finished up in the middle of the legs. Now the hole pattern that we've got here is a bit unusual, because there's one here somewhere, one there, and there isn't one out there. I don't know why there isn't one out there, but there isn't. Probably because you can't get at it very well from here or from below, I don't know. Anyway, now I have to decide whether to put 3 bolts in, which should be a bit like that, which I think looks a little bit odd, or just settle for 2. If I settle for 2, the separation of the 2 in the middle here is about 78, so about as I've got it. And that'll look alright. So, question, will it do the job? I think the answer to that is a pretty clear yes. They're 10mm bolts, so they'll put quite a bit of pressure on the wood, but importantly, this piece of wood is slightly bowed or cupped, so the top surface in the middle is higher than the outside edges. So having 2 bolts here pulling it down against the cast iron means that even without a bolt here or here, these edges will be pulled down hard against the frame, and it isn't going to go anywhere. And as for rigidity, I think that's going to come, you know, as in terms of moving like this, I think that's going to come from the backrest anyway, and the flanges on the feet of the legs, which provide the opportunity for bolting down if I ever see a need for it. But remembering these things weigh 20 kilograms each, and that slab's got to be another 10 kilograms, and I haven't got the back on yet, so you're looking at 50 kilograms of bench there. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, and it's not like it's going out in a public garden. The people sitting on here won't be doing all sorts of bizarre things and playing Tarzan on it or whatever else, so I reckon the 2 bolts in the middle is the go. That's what I'm going to do. I suppose there's always an option to come back later and put a 3rd one in if I think I've misjudged it. But I think we'll be good. Okay, so before I drill any more holes, I want to try and make sure, or make the best effort I can make, to get the ends square and make sure I'm not making a parallelogram or a trapezoid or something. And it's not the easiest thing to check because the this stuff here is sort of a bit, well, it's an imitation of an actual tree, so it doesn't have flat surfaces. But I think I've set tapes up on the floor and measured the distance between the centres of the legs front and back, and they've got pretty much the same dimension there, so I've at least got a parallelogram-ish. So then I'll use this sort of arrangement to check the square, and that's given me a pretty good reading. That's looking pretty square. I did the same up the other end with a similar result, so I think we're about right. Close enough for a garden bench anyway. So now I want to mark the other holes. I have put a line and I have done some measuring, but I didn't want to rely on that as a way of locating these other holes, so I'm going to spot through with a pencil. Something of a guide. Might as well mark the other hole while I'm here, although I don't have any intention of using it at this stage. Hopefully that's marked those 2 holes. Excuse me. Oh, I don't like all this bending down. My old knees tell me don't do that. And anyway, I've sort of offered that advice to my kids several times. Don't grow old. You won't enjoy the experience, but they say they'll make their own way. All right. Well, hopefully that's given me some markers. And drill a couple more holes. Actually, I haven't got a piece of wood I can use for the back yet either. That's something I'll have to source from somewhere. Let's hope those marks are easy to see and use. Well, I don't know how well you'll be able to see them, but here is the 2 holes that I've just marked, and it's comforting to see that they're both pretty much on the line which I drew initially when I was doing my measuring out. This one's a bit off centre, but when I drill my hole I'll just make sure I stay this way a little bit, and that's the one when I'm not going to drill at this stage. Oh, let's get all the way through that time. Yeah, well, let's try and see. Getting the bolts in is a little bit of a fiddle because, annoyingly, there isn't quite enough room. Oh, it's alright on the back ones. For these front ones, there isn't enough room to get them in without them having already been started in the hole, or leaning the leg over, which is what I did before. And that's you. What about you? Oh, look at that. That was lucky. Let's see how we get on at this end. Right. 3 out of 4. Oh, alright, well, I'll be happy with that. Alright, well that's the first half of the job done. It seems to be pretty solid. So now I've just got to find some material to make the back with. Okay, so I went out this morning, bought myself a piece of wood to use for the backrest on this bench, and what I've bought is they call it well, it's basically treated pine, and they use this H code system to describe it, where the code represents the degree of well, they call it biological hazard that the wood actually faces when it's put into its use situation. So obviously, for example, if you're going to bury the piece of wood straight in the ground, like maybe a post that's pushed straight into the ground, that's a very high level of risk for the wood. But if it's just going to be nailed up somewhere warm and dry, not exposed to the elements, then it's a very low level of risk. So H1 is the code they use for the lowest level of risk, and H5 for the highest level. Well, this stuff is H3, and they use the acronym LOSP, which I think is basically low toxicity organic treatment. I forget exactly what the LOSP stands for. But anyway, so this stuff is going to be perfect for the situation of a backrest of a bench. It's up in the air, not in contact with the ground, but it will be outside, so it needs to be resistant to decay by fungus and insects, especially termites. And it comes pre-primed, so you only got to give it a light sand and then paint it and you're off. So I think it's going to be perfect for this situation. So let's cut it to length. So we'll start by squaring up this cut end and then measure it out to get to exactly the length that we want. That's some dust extraction, I think. It's a pretty good saw. It doesn't have any trouble taking off a very thin shaving. Shut that door now. So the length we want is 1465. We need to get it all marked. The laser will guide us for the cut location. Okay. Turn the laser off. 1465, that's what we want. So I just checked that against the length of the actual bench seat just to satisfy myself that I've got it right, and yes it is. I've marked the location of the first hole for this backrest with just a bit of careful measuring, but I'm only actually going to drill the first hole in the drill press. The other 3 holes I'll drill by spotting through the holes in the cast iron, just to make sure I can get it looking right. The good thing with this drill press is because it has a round column, you can swing the drill out off to the side. Also got good speed control with this. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's a bit better. Right, speed it up a bit. Yeah. Right, so I'm just going to try that on the job and get it set up, and then we'll mark or drill the other holes in situ. Okay, so there we are. Back is on. All I've got left to do now is just round some corners off, on the ends, just round them off a little bit, and then slot some paint on it. Oh, and trim the bolts on the back there to length. They're obviously, well, they're what I had, but they're obviously way too long. So I trimmed the bolts to length and then dismantled the seat and the base. And what you can see me doing here is putting a rounded, I don't know what you call it, rounded chamfer, if that makes sense. A rounding over on the end of the seat base. This will make it much easier to paint because paint won't stick to a corner. So I'll do that on both ends of the seat base with a relatively large radius. Well, actually a radius that matches the existing radius on the long sides. And that little Makita router does a fantastic job, and it's just so easy to hold and use for jobs like this. It only takes 1/4 inch diameter bits, so it's not a heavy duty machine, but this is its forte, doing little trim jobs like this. So I changed the router bit over to one with a smaller radius, one that sort of matched the pencil rounding on the seat back piece, and did all 4 edges, the faces and edges of both ends of the seat back. That's because it's up in the air a little bit and people naturally put their hand on things like that, so I wanted the ends to be completely rounded off and minimise any chance of splinters or problems. So I've included a little bit of video here of the clamping setups that I used to hold the seat back upright so it couldn't fall over, and also to support the router as it was running over the very narrow width of the seat back. Okay, so I've got the primer and undercoat on these seat boards now. I didn't bother taking video of me painting it, it's pretty boring to watch, and viewers will know I'm not that keen on painting. And for anyone who's curious, that's the product I used. But anyway, ready for a top coat now. Okay, that's the painting finished. I'm certainly not the world's best painter, that's for sure, but I think it looks alright. And at the end of the day, it's a garden bench. It's going to be sat on, put out in the garden. Birds are going to crap on it, etc, etc. I'm not going to get too upset if there are painting defects. Okay, so next step is going to be to assemble it and put it in its final resting place. And that's another painting job finished, thank goodness. The product I used is a Dulux one. I'll put a link to what it is for the top coat, because it was a very free-flowing acrylic, almost like an enamel really. Well, it's sort of halfway between an acrylic and an enamel, and I think Dulux call it aqua enamel or some such marketing BS. But anyway, it did flow well, and it was the best gloss acrylic I've laid a brush in. But anyway, I'll put a link to it so you can check it out if you want to. It's bloody expensive though. It was $60 Australian for a litre, so it's certainly not cheap paint. Okay, so it's all finished and assembled and put in its intended resting spot. The boss, or co-client as she refers to herself on this project, has said she's pleased with it, quite likes it, so that's praise indeed. Oh, there we go. Now I'll just pull back and you see, get a bit more perspective of where it sits in its position. So it's nice and shady. We're actually standing under a big oak tree at the moment, so it'd be a nice place to spend a bit of time having a drink or whatever.